this development stuff is pretty closely aligned to what I do in my day job in construction. I'm just managing people and processes. Sort of at that point, it was like a light bulb moment.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors to find out more about their stories, mindset, and strategies. I'm Tyron Shum, and in this episode, we're speaking with founder and development manager of Plus Ethos, Henry Ledingham. Having worked in the commercial construction industry for 10 years, we hear about the amazing situation that he and his wife find themselves in, some of the projects he has worked on, and much, much more. We find out what a typical day looks like for Ledingham.
I love to get up early, so I'm up at 5. I grab a coffee. I live right next door to a park, so I go and take my coffee, sit on the steps of my house and look out over the park because it's just an awesome setting to see a bit of a sunrise and, you know, get the sounds of the morning happening around me. I've started journaling, so I sit down, do a bit of journaling, work out my goals for the day, do some gratitude work, and then I also do a bit of reading. So it's not necessarily reading relating directly to property development, but just more sort of personal interest stuff. I then start into the day at about 6 o'clock, and I focus on big tasks that I can get chunked away that are basically tasks that I call tasks that make my money needle move. So I heard that phrase from someone else, and it's basically just knuckling down on those tasks and getting them sorted before the distractions of the day come in. About 9 o'clock, I kind of switch the phone off airplane mode and then make some calls to consultants, or if I need to visit a project site, I'll duck out and have a look around site, speak to the guys. And then I love exercising, and I'm really into weight training and a bit of powerlifting as well. So about mid-morning, try and get a weight session in, and then after that, come back, a bit more admin work, lunch, maybe try and read again for another half an hour, and wind down the day with sort of some admin items that don't really need too much creativity. And shut down by about 5 o'clock and catch up with my partner and find out about her day and decompress a little bit.
Ledingham fills us in on what his wife does for a career and the interesting times they find themselves in.
She works, and it's probably a very topical subject at the moment. She works and is currently still employed by Virgin. So she's cabin crew. So we're going through a really interesting time where she just does domestic flights and has had some shifts, but they're maybe 10% of the amount of shifts she was getting before. And we're literally just sort of rolling through day by day with the news. We found out yesterday, I think, that they've gone into administration.
With all the troubles that Virgin Airline have found themselves in recently, we get an update on the impact it is having on his wife and himself.
It's been very interesting. Like we've moved in together just this year, and we've essentially been living out of each other's pockets since the start of the year. So it's brought us closer together. It's definitely hard for her and also myself not knowing, what the next day holds in terms of her employment. So it's one of those things where it's just you play each day as it comes and just be grateful for the things that you do have, I think. Trying to predict the future and trying to, work out all the scenarios sometimes doesn't necessarily help in that situation. So she's studying law as well, so in her last year, and looking to sort of branch out into that as well, which, takes the pressure off the Virgin workload, I guess.
We delve further into Ledingham's background, and he talks to us about what his upbringing was like.
So I had a really lovely childhood, and it was kind of unique in terms of some other people's childhoods, I guess. So I grew up on farms in New South Wales, northern New South Wales, around Moree and Tamworth. And when we lived down there, they were cattle and grain farms. My family were farmers and came from a long line of farmers. We then moved up to central Queensland, near a place called Longreach. So just to give a bit of an idea where that is, that's about 700 kilometres inland from Rockhampton. So it's really sort of in the centre and isolated. So I was born in the country, and then at about age 10 moved up to central Queensland. So that brought along some, awesome opportunities, but then awesome challenges as well. Like our closest town was 1 hour away, and that was just a very small town where there was a supermarket and a post office, and that's about it. And then the big city, in inverted commas, that was closest to us was 3 hours away, and that's where you'd literally, plan weeks ahead to go to the big city of Longreach to stock up on all your food, and if you needed clothes, to go there. So heaps of awesome experiences. We had floods while we were up there, so literally got flooded into our property and couldn't get any food or supplies in. And when it sort of got to the point of getting a little bit, desperate, we actually had a plane fly some supplies in. So we had to get out on a big paddock of ours that was really flat and slash all the grass down so the plane could land. So many things that we experienced out there, which sort of set me up, I think, for life and being able to, I guess, take on any challenge that came my way. Because once you go through those things, everything else generally pales in comparison. Really enjoyed it.
Ledingham shares with us the differences between his time schooling when he was in New South Wales compared to when he moved to the remote area in Queensland.
When we were in New South Wales, just going to a normal day school, and that was awesome. But then when we moved to central Queensland, we're obviously very isolated, and the school that was closest to us was 3 hours away. So we couldn't travel there and back in a day. So all of the kids in that area did School of the Air. So that's what I did. And essentially that was where the curriculum is given to you or given to us, and we engaged a teacher, or we used to, I think the term was a governess back then, and that teacher would come and live with us on the property, and Monday to Friday they would take us through the curriculum for the distance education school. And for about 1 hour period each day, we would dial in and chat with our teachers and fellow classmates. But this is back when there was no internet, so it was via UHF radio. So it was sort of the old, push to talk technology, and only one person could talk at a time, otherwise you couldn't hear the other person. We had some pretty interesting experiences with that, and you could go sit down in your classroom and do 4 hours worth of work, and then in your lunch break jump on your motorbike and go for a ride, and then be back in the classroom. It was awesome.
How big was the class that he was in, and did he have any siblings with him?
At that time, I was just doing school with my brother. So we literally had sort of a separate, I guess you'd call it an outbuilding or a cottage that was our school classroom. And me and my brother would be there, and our teacher. And we would, when we stepped inside that building, that was class time. And then when we stepped out, that was, farm fun time. And the school that we were part of, that was sort of based 3 hours away, that was a school that was about of 300, that made up of lots of kids from the local farming community, where everyone was isolated in the same position.
After going through the education system as a child, We find out whether he took on further studies or jumped straight into the workforce.
We moved back by the end of the Central Queensland experience back into northern New South Wales, and I finished my high schooling at a boarding school there. From that point, I have three brothers in my family, and we all made individual decisions, but sort of the consensus among us was that we didn't really want to continue the farming lifestyle. It's a pretty hard lifestyle, and you've really got to have it in your blood to push through with it. So at that point, I wanted to continue my studies, and I went to the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and I studied construction management there, and that basically set up the next phase of my life, where I was living and studying in Sydney. Coming from the rural background, that was a massive change. Just being in the city and surrounded by so many people, and working out how it all operated was definitely interesting. From that point, studied, got my Bachelor of Construction Management, and then started off on a career with a commercial builder, a Tier 1 commercial builder.
Before moving back up to Brisbane, Ledingham talks about the short period after moving back to New South Wales.
I was there for about 10 years, and I finished study. That took about 4 years. And then I started working for a commercial builder that was based in Sydney. As I started working for them, they had a project that was based down in Jervis Bay. And it was a project that needed people on site, to be based on site, not in the office. So as sort of a young contracts administrator back then, I thought that was an awesome adventure to be part of. So I stuck my hand up and volunteered to go down, be based on site. And that was a fantastic experience. I essentially lived and worked down in Jervis Bay, which is about 3 hours south of Sydney. And my partner at the time was living in Sydney, so on the weekends I'd drive back and stay in Sydney, or if it was summertime, we would spend it down in Jervis Bay, because if anyone has been down there, it's like a lovely national park area with beaches that have got like super white sand, and it's great in the summertime.
So what year was that when you went down to Jervis Bay to work?
That would have been about 2006, I think it was. Spent time down there about 3 or 4 years, and then I decided to move to a different commercial builder just to get a bit of different experience. They had an opportunity up in Brisbane, and it was just a 3-month contract up in Brisbane, and then the idea was to come back to Sydney. And I went up to Brisbane, completed the project up here, fell in love with the city and the lifestyle, and they had picked up more business, so I decided to put my hand up and stay up here. And then that's what led to the next 10 years of my life, I guess.
Ledingham explains some of the work and the projects he was working on for the commercial builder.
There's lots of different tiers of commercial builders, but I guess the easiest way to think of it is they generally build commercial buildings. So it might be big distribution centres, it might be data centres, it might be restaurants, banks, gyms, or office space. And the work I was doing was essentially project management towards the middle and the back end of my career with the commercial builders. So the work involved our estimating team winning a project, and I would get past essentially a set of construction plans, a budget that we had to build it for, and get introduced to the client. And then from that point on, me and my team had to tender and procure the project, so engage all of the trades. We had to come up with a construction program that fit and met all of the clients' milestones. And then we had to physically coordinate and construct that project, and all the way keeping the client up to date and working with them. So there's lots of things that that I was able to have the pleasure to build in my time in the industry. Like I've built data centers for TV stations, gyms, banks, office spaces, medical centers. There's so much variety I found in that industry. It wasn't just sort of building the same product over and over. And that's what I found that my personality really liked. I liked the physical sort of the tangibility that came out at the end of it. I could, work on a project for X amount of months, and at the end I could see and touch a product. So that really is satisfying to me.
He had essentially become a project manager, and we find out how this position came about for him within the business.
It's a process, and it's not necessarily quick, but essentially the common pathway is you start generally in sort of a contracts administrator or contracts coordinator position, some companies call it. So you're essentially on the paperwork side there. You're keeping track of budgets, you're engaging contractors, managing and while at that point you may not have the experience and the knowledge on how to physically construct things, you're learning the paperwork, the financial and the administrative side. The pathway I took was I wanted to get out on site and experience things physically, so I did a stint as a site manager. So in that essence, you're kind of dealing with trades face to face. You're working with them to solve problems or clashes that you come up with day to day. You're focused on safety at that point as well, and controlling and managing safety on site. And then from there, you can kind of switch back into a more office-based role in that of like a project engineer, or I went to a project manager. And that's sort of where you essentially, you're right, after the client has engaged some of their consultants and given you the concept design, that's when you take over and bring it to fruition. So I think that's why I have found it a pretty easy transition from commercial construction to development, because all of the processes and the people that I speak to day in the construction world, it's the same. It's just a different subject matter in the development world. Now, my chosen product is just land subdivision, but, I'm still coordinating designs. I'm still managing trades. I'm still focused on providing the end product in the best quality and also the quickest time frame. So it has been a relatively easy switch from that point of view, but then it's required a bit of a change in mindset because there's definitely different specialties that you need to be looking for in the two.
We delve into the concept of joint ventures and what Ledingham is mainly looking for in a partner.
The sort of quick evolution of my development is that my first development was my funds and a mate's fund. So we joint ventured together, and one of us brought the cash, that was my mate, and I brought the serviceability. So I purchased the shared our time to manage it. From that point, at that point, I was still working in my full-time job, and that obviously I could only borrow so much from the bank, and there was a ceiling on that. The next evolution was discovering sort of true joint venture, no money down projects, and that's where Matt Jones helped me out, like he spoke about on a previous one of your episodes with his joint venture boot camp. So I attended one of those and really sort of it opened my eyes that I didn't have to basically buy one property or do one project that reached the limit of my serviceability. I could, if I found other profitable projects, I could approach other people, see if they wanted to joint venture with me and use my experience to manage that. And then it would benefit, myself as well as the other joint venture partner. So that really took the cap or the ceiling off my mindset at that point. And from then, I've evolved into stopping my full-time work, developing full-time. And you're right, my approach at the moment is I essentially acquire sites, partner with investors or joint venture partners, and turnkey develop, manage the whole process.
His property investing journey has been a mix of developments and a buy and hold strategy.
I have purchased properties to buy and hold, and the full backstory of my property journey is that's how I started in property. I would probably say I'm a very late bloomer because, I'm 37 now, and I only bought my first property when I was 33. Before that point, I was aware of property but wasn't educated in it, and I just didn't really have a drive to investigate it. But then I purchased a PPR that I lived in. That was the first property. It was a purchase which I thought at the time was great. It was an uneducated purchase, and the intent for that purchase was that I would live in it, renovate it, and then essentially get it revalued and see if there was any uplift, or maybe rent it out as a investment property as a long-term hold. That, because my research and education at that point was inadequate, I had a very tough conversation with my accountant at the time. I sort of explained to him my strategy that I saw for that property, and he had done a lot of property development and investment. And after I told him the nuts and bolts of it, he said, "No, look, I don't think you've selected correctly. That property is not really going to do anything for you. It may be neutrally geared, but it's not really going to grow in value too much. The cash flow is not going to be great. It's essentially just going to be a limit or a handbrake on your portfolio and your serviceability." And for me, hearing that, after I'd gone through the effort of purchasing it, and I did a renovation on the bathroom and the kitchen and put sort of 2 weeks worth of blood, sweat and tears into it, that was like a slap in the face. But I mulled over it for a couple of days. What the accountant said, he was essentially saying just offload it, sell it, and select a better property next time. So I swallowed my pride and did that. And I'm grateful that I did sort of take his advice, because I then started getting myself educated, and it started initially as just getting educated in the buy and hold space. And then partway through that education, where I was going to seminars, listening to podcasts, and getting some mentoring, I stumbled on the world of development, and I thought this development stuff is pretty closely aligned to what I do in my day job in construction. I'm just managing people and processes. And then sort of at that point, it was like a light bulb moment. I was like, this is interesting to me. It's really exciting, but it also is me being able to leverage a skill that I have. And from that point on, it was just, focused on getting educated, tooled up and skilled up for development. So, it was kind of a 2 steps forward in property initially, 1 step back, and then, onwards from there.
We discuss his first property and the details of what happened to it since he purchased it.
Sold that, and it was the right call. To give context why it was the wrong purchase, it was a 3-bedroom unit in an old sort of 6-pack, so garage underneath and living area up top. And I picked an area, it was in Coorparoo in Brisbane, and at the time of purchase there was a big development down at Coorparoo called Coorparoo Square that was in construction and about to come online. And right when I had finished my renovations and was going to either put my property back on the market or rent it out, I found out I was competing with some brand new finished apartments that were, a much better location than mine. So that's the kind of research that I missed out on in that initial purchase and didn't sort of scope out, how is my product going to compare against what else is coming online in the area.
Would he consider that to be one of his worst property investing moments?
I'd say that that's one of them. The bitter pill to swallow in that one was twofold, in the sense that, I had got a decision that I thought was right. I had got that wrong, or it just didn't align with my strategy. And then the other point was in a monetary sense. Like I spent 2 weeks of physical labour doing the renovation, and then I also piled about 20 grand worth of materials and fixtures and fittings into it. And that was essentially for nothing. I managed to get out of that property and sell it for essentially what I went into it with, but the additional labour and cost I put into it wasn't realised because it was competing with a brand new product down the road. So that was a really hard but a good lesson to learn, that I essentially overcapitalised on a product that no one wanted, or if they did want it, they would just go and buy it new.
The global pandemic of COVID-19 had a massive impact on a lot of people, and we find out about the effect it had on Ledingham.
I had another one, and that was a sort of a more recent one, which I wouldn't say is my worst investing moment, but it was definitely a stressful one, and it occurred around this pandemic that we're experiencing of COVID-19. I essentially had a project that I was going to settle on, and it was leading up to settlement day. And at that point, I had gone unconditional on my finance because all of the signs with this lender were good. I believe that, it's a profitable project, and there was no reason for them to not fund the deal. But as news of the pandemic sort of spread and it gathered momentum, and the media sort of hysteria built, that lender essentially pulled out of their finance offer. They said the market for them specifically is too uncertain, and we won't be able to fund your purchase. So at that point, that was a real shock. And I was in a position where the vendor for the property wasn't very willing to offer extensions. I got a small extension, but essentially I had to settle on the property somehow. So it kicked me into another gear. I overcame that and was able to settle by sort of hustling and just working day and night with other lenders to get the situation sorted. But the lesson learned was, that in terms of the risks out of left field, I guess everyone thought that a pandemic was maybe not even on anyone's radar at that point, but it was realised in my instance. It became an issue and I had to deal with it. So I think while it was super stressful at the time, and it's something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Like I will have lots of either protections in my contracts now to deal with pandemics, where we can essentially activate those conditions and ask for longer extensions. But yeah, that was a real lesson.
We delve into how he was able to eventually settle the property and why it was done this way.
To give a bit more explanation around that project, I was in a position where the project, I was buying it with a DA, and I had been working on it for a couple of months, and I had put a significant amount of my own money into the project. So if I wasn't able to settle on that project, what happened with the DA, it stays with the land. So essentially the owner of the land, if I didn't settle, would retain the benefit of the DA, and my money that had assisted getting that DA would have benefited the owner. And so all of my work would have been for nothing. And in the REIQ purchase contracts, so the Queensland land purchase contracts, there's provisions for delay and acts of delay in the contract, but the remedy mechanism in there is for the contract to be terminated. And that's exactly what I didn't want to happen. Like I needed an extension so I could source an alternative lender. And everything in the contract was essentially saying, well, this has happened, so you can terminate. And I was at the point where I was like, no, I don't want to terminate. I must continue this contract, but I need to extend it because of these acts of nature, being the pandemic, that have occurred. So what I was losing by that financier was pulling out. That was a financier that was going to lend 70%. So there was essentially, a chunk of money. I had I had 30% equity, and the 70% lender had pulled out. So I then had to find another lender. And in that environment, it's still occurring now, I guess, the lenders are ratcheting back their LVRs. So, I found a lender, they were able to do 65% LVR. So I had to reach out to some of my investing partners and increase my equity position through assistance of my investors. The second issue I came up with, once I had locked down the new lender that would come in and assist, was that for this development, it's a 9-lot subdivision, you need to get commercial valuations. And I had one done with the previous lender, but that commercial valuation was only directed to the previous lender. And when I asked for the valuation to be assigned to this new incoming lender, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't assign it. And that was essentially because of that valuer's risk position. They saw that, they had valued it before the pandemic started, and they were being told by their professional indemnity insurers, don't assign any valuations or don't do any new development valuations. So then the search became, I'd found a lender, but they needed a commercial valuation, and I had been granted an extension of 2 weeks. So I essentially needed to get a new commercial valuation done, returned, and then loan documents drafted and created, signed, all done in 2 weeks. So the challenge then became, okay, we've got the lender, now let's find a valuer that is comfortable to visit site, do their due diligence, do their report and reissue it, within a week, so that I could leave the other week for the loan documentation to be drafted and issued and executed. So it was literally, sort of a challenge a minute. But, through the process of going into solicitors' offices on weekends, printing stuff, running to the bank, we got it done. And we managed to settle on the property. So now the project is secured, the DA is there, and it's an awesome project. But yeah, there was a big learning from what occurred with the pandemic, which I'll take for the rest of my development career. That's for sure.
We dive into his subdivision and we discuss the changing market during this time and whether he can get a good return on investment.
My general approach, if I'm looking at sites that are raw sites with no DA on them, and I will have to obtain the DA myself, I will only proceed on sites that have a 20% or plus profit margin. With this site, it already had a DA, so the planning risk element had been removed. It was already approved. We knew there was 9 lots, and we just had to basically deal with the construction cost risk and the sales risk. So that's a 15% profit project, and I think I wouldn't want to go lower than that if purchasing a site of that scale with a DA. The time frame for the project, it's a 12-month project, and at the moment it's just starting. So we foresee that there's definitely in the next couple of months there's going to be reduced consumer sentiment, and anything that's going to be marketed in that period will have to be competitively marketed. But I believe that in 6 to 8 months, things will be back to maybe not where they were before, but people at least will know where they're sitting with their employment. They will know where their finances are heading, and the routines, just the daily routines of what you can and can't do, will be well defined. So I think it will smooth out, and that's why I believed in that project. It wasn't a project that needed to be constructed and sold this month or next month. Like, there was a long time frame until sales and settlements needed to be brought on the market.
We've heard about one of his worst investing moments, and now we find out the moment where everything changed for the better.
I would say that would be it. It was more that my mindset up until about sort of 4 years ago was I was a PAYG employee. Like, I'd always had a boss and I'd always worked for someone. And I don't know why, but I just hadn't ever considered that I could do something that was wholly and solely of my own creation, and I could work for myself doing something that I loved. But as 4 years ago, as those sort of light bulbs started to switch on, I'd say that was my biggest light bulb moment or aha moment, where it was like, okay, you've worked for other people and been a company man up until this point, have a crack at something of your own, because that way it can be wholly and solely yours. Your effort that you put in should correlate directly to the effort that comes out, and you can craft something that is to your standard and to your liking. So I'd say that was the biggest one, followed closely by, wow, this property development stuff is my path to going out on my own and being my own boss.
Ledingham explains his mindset when he was starting up his property development business and how he wanted to gradually phase into it.
I kind of structured it to phase it in. So my first project I did, which was a 6-lot subdivision, I was fully employed in a day job. So I essentially ran that project in the evenings. Like, when I get home after a day of work, I'd have dinner and then sort of punch out 2 to 4 hours worth of work in the evenings and then on weekends as well. As I got that one almost completed, then I bought a second 6-lot subdivision online, and I was still working full time. But then I knew I needed to have some guidance and some assistance with making the transition. So I started looking around for mentors, and essentially linked up with an awesome mentor who helped me craft my exit plan from full-time work into full-time development. And it occurred over the period of about a year and a half. So it was a planned process.
With his experience in building the big commercial projects, Ledingham shares why he decided to go down the route of subdivisions rather than many available options.
I wanted to just start simple and then build from there. So for me, I believe that subdivisions are relatively low risk in the scheme of development, because you're not putting a built product on there that you're having to essentially guess what the market wants to buy. And I understand that there's a lot of research that goes into formulating the product that the market wants. But I at the moment, just want to keep it simple. Start with land subdivision, build that process up till it's a solid, process. I can essentially fine tune it. And then once, 3-4 years down the track, if I believe I'm at a stage where putting a built product on the land is a benefit to me and my investors, then I'll take that step. But I just, as part of some of my mentoring, it was hammered into me, just keep your focus narrow. Don't look at all of the shiny options out there in terms of lots of fancy different development strategies. Just get focused, get really good at one strategy, and then branch out once you've nailed that. So I also see subdivision as having the benefit of other exit strategies. So, if the land product isn't generating the interest that you need in terms of sales, you can take the next step of adding a built product, and that might be just a normal dwelling. It might be a dual occupancy dwelling in some councils. It might be a rooming accommodation dwelling. But I like the fact that I was keeping strategy simple and also my costs low. Like, I obviously don't have to get financing and fund building, let's say, 6 houses before I can start to pay down that. So that was the sort of two driving things, I guess: simplicity and overall funding ease.
We learn more about the strategy behind his subdivisions, and Ledingham explains how he's able to find the best deals for his subdivisions.
My strategy now, after I have educated myself and sort of learnt from a lot of other way more knowledgeable people, is that you need to understand the council area that you're working in. And by understanding that, you'll know the zoning of different land. You'll know the minimum and maximum requirements of lot density and sizes you can put on land. So once you have that knowledge, you can assess different sites, and you can get an educated but not conclusive view of what you could do to a piece of land. And there's lots of different approaches, but sort of the one that I took on my first subdivision, to be specific about a project, is that that was a 1 acre property, and the selling agent knew that it was capable of being subdivided but didn't know how many lots. From my education at that point, I knew the same, knew it could be subdivided, didn't know how many lots. I had some initial chats with some of my project team, the town planner, they guided me to say, we believe you can do 4 lots for sure. That's a given the council zoning and requirements. And then so on that basis, I got the project under my control, or the property, under my control, by putting a purchase contract onto it with a due diligence period. And then in the due diligence period, that's essentially where you start getting really specific and speaking to council and finding out what they will generally approve in the case of the subject property. So that site was in Moreton Bay Regional Council in North Brisbane, and they have an awesome facility where you can book and have a pre-lodgement meeting that you don't have to pay any money for it. They're free. So all you have to do is book it in and wait about 2 weeks, and then you can go into council, sit down with them and say, this is the property I have. I would like to subdivide it. We're thinking this many lots. What are your thoughts? And they'll give you a planning and an engineering view of the development of that site, and they'll give you some written notes to take away from it. And that was the process I did for that first subdivision, where I got the site under my control. In the due diligence period, I met with council. Council guided me to say, you can subdivide this into 6 lots. However, if you do want to subdivide it into 6 lots, you must provide a new piece of council infrastructure in the form of a new road. So that was the point where the selling agent thought that the site could only have a yield of 4 lots, but then I discovered I could actually get a yield of 6 lots, so a greater profit. But then I had to factor out in how much it would cost me to build the road, and then that sort of process then takes off, getting your engineering costings nutted out and worked out, and then assessing before your due diligence period ends whether you're comfortable with the due diligence you've done and whether you're going to proceed with the purchase.
There is nothing like having experience, and he talks to us about how his previous life in commercial construction has helped him find deals and understand if they will be profitable.
Depending on what council I'm working in, I really insist on trying to get some consultation with council and getting their feedback. And it's generally in the form of that pre-lodgement meeting. So at least if you go to council with your intention, they can either sort of say, yes, we will support that generally. They'll give you some feedback as well. I say, look, we'd support that, but you may have to add this element, or you may have to compromise on that element. Or I've had this as well. I've taken sites to council and they've shot it down from the get-go, and they've said, no, absolutely not. We're not doing that. And that's what you need to be aware of before you actually get in a position where you're unconditional on a purchase of a property, because you can end up settling on a site that is not developable, or instead of 10 lots which you imagine you could get, you might only get 5. That is my sort of gold standard of due diligence, doing all of the costing and work with my project team, but then also getting council consultation on what they will and won't support, because at the end of the day, they're the people that will be approving your application for the development.
We expect these successful property investors to have sophisticated ways of getting deals, but sometimes the best deals are right there for everyone, but you just need to know what to look for.
All of my deals, apart from one so far, have just been out there on realestate.com. So I sort of had a bit of a misconception when I started educating myself that, I must get everything off market, and I must, I need to build up a big network of agents and deal finders to be able to get a profitable site. But I was pleasantly surprised by, the sites that I've found so far. 75% of them have just been out there, and they've either been sites where people haven't gone to that level of due diligence, like they haven't sat down with the council and said, can we do this? And they've missed an opportunity. Or maybe it's a site where there's some issues that engineering-wise someone hasn't been able to solve, whereas the engineering team that I've worked with have been able to solve it. I've only had one project so far where it's come to me essentially off market, but that is a part of my business where previously I haven't had the time to be able to build up those connections because I was working full time. But now I'm starting that process and sort of developing a regular network of agents that, hopefully can bring some of those opportunities my way. Part of that as well with my chosen strategy. So my focus is land subdivision, as I mentioned, but ideally I'm focusing on projects that are between 5 lots and 20 lots. And I purposely want to attack those projects because I believe that the competition for those kind of sites is a bit thinner generally. Staying away from the splitters and 2 and 3 lot subdivisions, there seems to be a lot of competition because that's the entry level development site, and that people starting development generally start out on those. So there's a big section of the I guess you'd call it beginner development market looking for those sites. And then there's a lot of bigger developers, way more experienced and knowledgeable than me, that are attacking much bigger sites, 50, 100 lot sites. But by me focusing on, just above the beginner people and below the big boys, I hopefully can get that competitive advantage on the sites that I attack.
Ledingham discusses his property portfolio, and we find out how many subdivisions he's completed over the past few years.
My business has only started this year, so I was literally only, we're in April now, 4 months old. So I've completed 4 projects to date, and this next one, which is a 9-lot subdivision, is sort of the next evolution, but that will be the first project with me working in the business full time.
We delve into the motivating factor of the why behind choosing the path of property investing.
I have a 4-year plan, and the sort of high-level view of that is to help me get to a point with my personal wealth where I don't have to trade my time for money anymore. And the intent of that is so that I can essentially help my friends and family around me get to the same level of wealth where, if a pandemic hits, then there's no real stress. If you lose your job, then that's cool because you've got a portfolio or lots of money just as a nest egg in the bank. And the overall intent is, once I can help myself, I help my friends and family, and then after that, sort of the world's my oyster. I can, branch out into any, area that I choose. But it's definitely that's what I've realised over the past, I'd say, 4 to 5 years, that I realised that I was trading my time for money, and a lot of the time was spent working, and I wasn't really having much time to enjoy life. And that's the goal of it now, to be able to get to the point where I do still work because I love it, but I can spend a greater amount of my time living and, helping other people live and enjoy their lives as well.
Ledingham shares with us some of the people that have had the biggest impact on his successful career.
Matt Jones definitely helped me greatly with joint ventures and sort of opening myself up to them. I've sort of taken part in lots of his seminars and education. Someone else who was sort of my most recent mentor is Rob Flux. So he's based in Brisbane, and he runs the Property Developer Network. So Rob has monthly meetups in Brisbane that I was attending, and then I reached out to him at the beginning of 2019 when I knew I wanted to sort of leave full-time work, and I asked him if he offered mentoring, and he came back with a course that he has run very successfully and is running still now. It was called the Property Development Formula. And essentially that course was like a 12-month course that paired mentoring on specific property development strategies and techniques and education. But then it also paired another awesome element, which I hadn't really thought of too much before, and it was specifically on mindset. So back then when I did it, Rob was partnering with Tony Meredith, a great life coach, and that mentoring over 12 months was essentially lots of, 3 or 4 times a month, focusing on a property-specific mentoring session and then a mindset session. And those two things sort of built my exit strategy. And that is the real reason that I was able to leave my full-time job when I did, because without that level of mentoring and that accountability, I believe I would have done it eventually, but I wouldn't have done it as soon as I have been able to.
He provides some of his best book recommendations for us.
I read a couple of years ago one called Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. It's by T. Harv Eker. And that was a really powerful book for me in just understanding wealth and how your money mindset or your money or your wealth sort of thermostat is created and set. There was nothing really specific about property development in there, but that's a really awesome book just to get a high-level understanding of how your mind works in relation to money and whether you've got a healthy or unhealthy relationship with it. I read also a book by Steve McKnight, 0 to 130 Properties in 3.5 years. And although that book is sort of more buy and hold, investing focused, and it may be a little bit outdated, the concepts and just the story in there that Steve went through and his success was really inspiring. Like I read that and went, wow, like this guy has basically charged out and done this all on his own, and has been able to make a great success of it. So that was really inspiring. And then one that I've just finished at the moment, which is a bit sort of more business focused or marketing focused, is called Sell Like Crazy by Sabri Subi. And that's sort of on marketing and digital branding. And it's something that I had not a great deal of knowledge about before, but it's sort of a one-stop shop in terms of how to approach, marketing and branding and bringing in customers to a new business. So that's, again, not property development focused, but really good for anyone that has their own business.
If you could say anything to his past self from 10 years ago, what would it be?
I would just say open your eyes up to other possibilities other than being, an employee. Like at that point 10 years ago, I hadn't even really thought about the concept of working for myself. So I would just say start thinking about that, because there's lots of other opportunities out there for you. And in this day and age, it's getting easier and easier with the information out there for people to do their own thing. I would also say start finding out about property, because I only really started researching and getting my head around property when I was about 34, 33. So I would have loved to have gone back in time to the time I'm, 18 in my first job, and just say start educating yourself back then, because as everyone sort of knows, that the time that you're in the market is a massive advantage. Even if you don't have the means to be doing much in the market at that time, just being in it helps a massive amount. So, I'd just say find out about property and think outside the box in terms of employment. You don't always have to work for someone else.
How much of your success do you think is due to skill, intelligence, and hard work, and how much of it is because of luck?
I think about 90% is skill, hard work, and intelligence. There's always an element of luck, and sometimes that's bad luck. Like, I was thinking about it in the sense of, the pandemic that we've recently experienced. No one really could foresee that. And in most cases, even though there's, short-term challenges and hardship, it's only a small percentage. And if you just keep cracking like that skill, hard work, and educating yourself and getting sort of more intelligent about what you're doing, that will always overcome it. So, I'm a big believer that hard work and drive overcomes luck and chance any day of the week.
Thank you to Henry Ledingham, our guest on this episode of Property Investory. If you want to hear more about his journey, then visit our website at propertyinvestory.com.